Hello, everybody. I'm Julian David. I'm the CEO of Tech UK, which is the trade association in the UK for digital technology companies. We cover everything from chips to clicks, and we have 850 member companies, including Huawei, who are the associate company working with the Evening Standard to host this conversation. And I'm delighted to have the conversation with two experts in this space, both technology and the world of work. Bruce Daisley, who's former European Vice President of Twitter, a podcaster, and also an author, and particularly an author of a book which I think could be very relevant here, Bruce, which is The Joy of Work. And I've practiced very carefully not to get that last word wrong, by the way. And we also have Jeremy Thompson, who is UK Vice President of Huawei, but a long-term tech leader in a variety of companies and roles. So welcome, Bruce, and welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are emerging from the pandemic, I think, not uniformly, but it's clear that in the UK, progress is being made. We're on a track now. And if we look at London and we think about London, I'd be very interested to know what do you think, particularly from maybe a larger company perspective, what is the way that we're going to be going forward? Are we going to be returning to how it was, or are we going to be in a brand new technological future, or is it going to be a hybrid of the two? And I mean, Bruce, maybe that's one to start with for you, but then come to you, Jeremy.
Yeah, well, look, firstly, thank you for having me. I think critically, probably what it's forced us to reflect upon is that the way that technology has advanced in the last 20 years has been dazzling, and we haven't adapted the way that we were working at all. We haven't made any accommodations. We haven't really, since the arrival of email, we've not really reinvented or reimagined the way that we're working. And so, it did beg the question, what was the point of the internet to some extent? If we were going to spend all this time setting ourselves up with all this technology, what was the point if we weren't going to adapt? I think what we've seen in the last 12 months, therefore, is this realization that effectively we've had stabilizer wheels put on our reinvention, and we've realized, every firm has realized, that they're far more capable of transformation than they ever believed possible. In fact, I chat to businesses all of the time, and most of them right now are in this position where they're saying to themselves, we've demonstrated how capable we are of reinvention. Now we need to give ourselves the faith, the conviction that we can keep this going. So I think, that's going to be the critical thing. I think we've not necessarily seen the second order effects and third order effects of what's going to happen to our cities, our commercial real estate, the way that commuting works, the way that transport networks have been set up in the past. I don't think we've begun to see the second order effects of that. I think right now we're still in the zone where we're looking at firms who are embracing hybrid working, and we're believing that this is a choice. And I suspect very quickly we're going to realise firms aren't necessarily going to have as much choices as they might initially perceive of that, because it's going to be market driven. But an intriguing time, I think, for any of us.
So the number of things I want to come back to there, Bruce, but if I just come to you, Jeremy, I'm trying to work out what big companies are going to do. If you look at things like the recent FT piece, if you look at the various announcements, everybody back to the office, nobody back to the office. Some people back to the office some days, some people not. Help. What do you think is going to happen?
I think Bruce is right that people have taken the opportunity of the disruption of the last 12 months to reevaluate their values, their business, and just say, well, how can we do things better? And I think there's broadly three models that people are adopting or planning to adopt. I think there is one school which is saying we're going to go back to as we were before. Some people are in that school. There's another school which is saying we will not go back to full-time working. In fact, it's going to be working from home, and the exception is going to be to work in the office. And then I think there is the third school, which is the hybrid working, which is, the 60-40, 40-60 split between home and work. And I would say that on the sample in preparation for this call today, I spoke to a number of different companies, and it seems to be like 50% are in the hybrid model, and sort of 25% in each of the other models. So the hybrid model looks to be the one that is going to be selected. And then, if you look at what companies have done during the lockdown, they've said, well, we don't need this expensive office space. And some of them have redesigned their offices. And it's actually solving some of the long-term problems that they have had with things like office accommodation, recruitment, targets towards zero carbon footprints, and they're using this disruption to re-engineer their business and hopefully improve the lives of their customers and themselves. So little examples of, like a retail hairdressers, through social distancing had to reduce the number of people in their office or in their salons. And they found that by working longer hours, they can have the same throughput of customers. But now they're going back to, let's put it the normal. They're going to continue with the longer hours because their customers preferred, the shift working of the staff, so that they could complete their tasks, but actually through a longer period of time. And it also worked for employees as well. So we're seeing re-engineering of our workplaces, which have basically been allowed by the time of the last 12 months.
Just to jump in on something that Jeremy said there.
Sure.
So Jeremy, it's worth calling out that the profile of us on this call, where we're all white gentlemen of a certain age. Let's just say that we've completed the binge watching of our youth. So we're of a certain age. And here's the interesting thing: what you discover is that the models that Jeremy laid out there. I did some research into these, and it suggests that firms that are allowing the older white males to make the decisions of what to do are more likely to go back to the office. And it's the companies that are inclusive, have got more diversity at the top table, are actually listening to what their teams want, who are adopting one of the other approaches. So it's really intriguing. If you're finding yourself like Goldman Sachs in an organization which is saying the way we preferred it was going back to the way that things used to be, it may well be that there's the curse of incumbency there, that you've got people who the old system really advantaged, saying, let's go back to the old system. And so, that's what I would say. I think Jeremy so brilliantly articulated we're at this fork in the road. And the big opportunity for any of us is to say, let's make sure that the decision we make next is an inclusive one, rather than one necessarily that might advantage the winners of the past.
Exactly. And you've got companies like Allen and Overy who have polled all of their staff. Said, well, what do you think? So huge companies are saying, let's take the opportunity, ask ourselves the question, and then redesign the business based on that. This is going to be a key moment for business leadership. This is really a leadership problem, even more perhaps than a technology problem. And I agree, Bruce, we've got to listen to our staff, because people have got different interpretations of what this means. My daughter is dying to get back into the office, and my son, similar age, quite happy to work from home. So it's not an age thing; it's an individual circumstance thing.
So let me test you a little bit on this. Bruce, you wrote recently about that IT worker in New York, Jonathan Frosty. It's not all wonderful, is it? I mean, the guy had a heart attack and posted on LinkedIn. And he attributed that to the lifestyle of working at home. You recently had the founder of Zoom saying, I'm fed up with doing Zoom calls. There is now apparently, there's always a medical condition, isn't there? But there is apparently a clear medical condition of too much video, too much looking at yourself. I share that. I certainly share that. So, it's not all upside, this sort of technology-enabled work, is it? Do you want to touch a little bit on that, Bruce?
Yeah, I think firstly it's worth having a cautionary note. You know, we've worked in a really extreme. We've gone from yin to yang, from neither to both to either. You know, like we've gone from this extreme, and I think anyone who's had to deal with children going feral in the next room, or the fact that they've been queuing outside Tesco's for an hour and a half to buy a 4-pack. You know, we know that we've worked in something that probably isn't going to be the norm. I think, no doubt, most of us have recognised that we've been given a clear signal that some of this isn't right, that doing constant video calls just feels exhausting. It begs the question, are we communicating too much? Are we putting too much of a premium of just talking to each other? Is too much of our work done spoken out loud? And so it's actually, as a provocation for the right firms, the firms who are thinking, well, it looks like there's going to be a boisterous economy as we exit this year, we're going to go into a pretty robust and healthy economy. Someone might say, let's use that moment, let's use that economic advantage as a moment to challenge some of these things that we've done. Now, I spoke to one organisation yesterday, and they'd said to me something really intriguing. They'd said, we've segmented our meetings into 2 different categories. There are the meetings that we are kind of like check-ins. I call these convergent meetings, like a maths test. There's one version of the answers, and we're just trying to converge on an agreement of what those answers are. And then the meetings where there's a bit of argy-bargy, there's a bit of, you know, back and forth, people disagreeing with each other. I think of them as divergent meetings where we've got a plurality of opinions. They've said, we're really agreed that those convergent meetings, we're going to do them as Zoom calls, Microsoft Teams calls, whatever they are. Monday, we'll go through all our Teams calls. It kind of works. We've found a rhythm where it kind of works. Those meetings where there's a bit of how's your father, where there's a bit of argy-bargy, arguments over the table, actually, we're going to do them face-to-face. Really intriguing. I think it's sort of saying we've learned something from this experience. The ones where there's going to be a bit of dispute, a bit of constructive disagreement, we want to be in the room together to remind ourselves that we do love each other. We can have a legally mandated hug at the end. And so as a consequence, I think, you know, we're working out those different things that we can learn from the technology, and we can advance work on the back of that.
So,
yeah, I think that's great.
Very interesting. Jeremy, let me maybe take that. You mentioned the idea of surveys. You said survey the ways that Tech UK is a small organisation. We're 65 people, normally based in St Bride Street in London, and obviously we're over there. So we've done a survey of our staff. I have to say the answer was don't really know. I know what I like and what I don't like. I don't really know what I want to do or how I want to work going forward. And you talk about leadership. You know, how does leadership work in that context? You know, do we know? Do you take do you take a view? You know, the Goldman Sachs, this is how it's going to be, or do you say we'll suck it and see as we go along?
So I think it is a leadership issue, and you know, we've got to ask ourselves, what is the point of the office? And we may not get to the right answer first time, but it's worth asking that question, and you know, reevaluating and then maybe changing plans slightly. I mean, I know of one huge engineering company that decided very early on that it was not going to have all its staff based in its offices. So it took the opportunity while people were not in the office to redesign the whole workspace, taking out sort of individual offices and have hot desks and meeting areas, and following the example of some of the tech companies who have used their sort of canteen area as a sort of hub for the business, making it, you know, sort of comfortable and plenty of places to sit down as opposed to a functional eating area, and just basically redesigned their business. I mean, that's a huge capital expenditure, but in addition to that, they've also been able to hire engineers from the north of England that they've historically not been able to hire because they've always insisted that they work in the office. So they're sort of solving their recruitment problem by increasing the size of their talent pool. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, in some ways we're solving some of the historic problems by re-engineering our business and office spaces to allow us to include others in different ways of working. But I think the net is that we've got to take these baby steps, experiment, get the feedback. If it works, great, do more of it. If it doesn't work, then revisit it. I worked in a distributed organization for many years, and I found where you had a small number of people who were permanently away from the office and a large number of people permanently in the office, those who were out of the office became disenfranchised. And some of the techniques that we used there of bringing them in for key events and open discussions became really important. And the walk in the park and the pint in the pub and is sort of the non-verbal communications that you get in the office. We need to incorporate those into how we operate.
And I think that's these are very interesting points. I think that's you were saying the same thing. I think, Bruce. Let me take you perhaps to a question of along with leadership, what about trust? And is there a danger that the technology, I live this with our organisation, our members all the time, that people need to trust the technology and that it's a good thing. And you see a lot of comments about, work monitoring, keystroke monitoring, video monitoring, are your eyes shut, et cetera, which is sort of the new management suspicion of the duvet day, working from home potential, isn't it? Bruce, I'd be interested, perhaps first of all, your view on this. You need a different sort of leadership, don't you? But you need to maintain the trust of your people. And if you do recruit engineers from the north or from India or wherever, if the objective of doing that is just to lower your costs, is that actually a healthy thing for an organisation?
Yeah,
Bruce,
I do subscribe to the idea that we can trust engineers from the north, but these. But I mean, look, I'm open-minded.
So can they trust us?
Not rule anything
Is what I was asking.
Let's not rule anything in. Let's not rule anything out. It's too early to say. It's a really intriguing thing, isn't it? There was a piece of research in January that said that 41% of people were getting ready to quit their job. It's almost like there's been this careers transfer window that we look at people who've switched jobs right now, going, great, good on you. Not for me. I want to see something that's a bit more tangible. But there does seem to be this careers window that a lot of people are thinking, I've just had a diabolical year and a half staring into my screen, and when I get the opportunity, I'm gonna move to pastures new. It's really intriguing. It does represent a big opportunity for us to use websites like Glassdoor. There's probably other places that are better, that actually give us an insight into what it's like to working in different companies. So I suspect a lot of people, I remember chatting to one person who said, my week is that I start my first video call at 8:30 on a Monday morning. And he said, I do over 40 hours of video calls. Imagine that. I always think, do you remember when our mums used to scold us for being too close to the television?
Too much telly.
If our poor mums had known the future that we were willingly marching into, she'd have been heartbroken. And so, I do think there's probably going to be a degree, the more transparency there can be between people describing their experience of work, I think the more likely we're going to get to something that feels slightly more sustainable, more considerate to our well-being.
Yeah, and just to pick up on that as well, I read a stat that said last year was a record year for people starting their own businesses. And I've had personal experience of this, people picking up on that moment and saying, well, everything's changed and, here I am. So, Jeremy, are you seeing that when you look around, that actually maybe this is where we become a nation of small businesses rather than big corporations, big offices, entrepreneurial stuff. And obviously, we're going to get to this in a minute. What does that mean for London? If everybody starts a small business in Bromsgrove or somewhere, or Bromley, what are they going to do about coming into London?
Yeah, I think any disruption is an opportunity for invention. And we've been through a major disruption. And I think in the same way the businesses have looked at themselves, individuals have looked at themselves and said, is this really what I want? And then made decisions to move or to set up their business. We're seeing that, and now's a pretty good time to do it. I mean, London has been through so many changes over the years. In my own work experience, we went through sort of big bang deregulation, regulation. We've had Brexit. It's a hugely resilient and inventive city, and I have no doubt that it will emerge from the last 12, 18 months or so stronger, as we all take that opportunity to reevaluate what we really want to do and put our shoulder into that activity. There will be movement between companies, and those companies who work 100% flexible may not be appropriate for some people who want to work in the office all the time, and vice versa. So I think there will be sort of natural movement between organizations and people starting up their business as well. But this point of trust and sort of governance, we were talking about earlier on. I just want to come back to that very briefly. If you sit in an open plan office with the boss at one end, the boss can see everyone in the room. And whether they go to the photocopier or get themselves a coffee, somehow that seems all right. We got used to that. But if you insist on an always on camera when you're sitting at home, that doesn't feel right. Certainly doesn't feel right to me. And so we do need to understand what the technology will enable, and what the technology perhaps gives us a sort of different feeling from the same kind of experiences. So I think the governance about this flexible working and how we translate the culture of our organization and the trust that we have in the way we currently do our business into the future is really key. So that as people make those decisions to start their own business, to change their job, or to work flexibly when historically they've worked in 100% in the office, will I think be critical to the success of the new models.
Thanks. And Bruce, are you as confident London will come back? Big city, the global city above all, and does that work?
I think we're going to reflect. I think we'll reflect in 5-10 years on how London had lost its mojo at the time we've just gone through, and how this was the making of it. Cities aren't vibrant if young people can't afford to live in them, if artists can't afford to live in them. We hear the glory days of Soho that had, artists, writers, poets living there. No one can afford to live it. Flats should not cost £1 million. And what you do with becoming sort of obedient to the gods of money is you create cities that aren't inclusive and aren't interesting. People with money generally aren't that interesting. That's the sad truth of it. Now, if we want a city that's technicolor and full of life, then this could be the making of it. Now, I'm very much of the opinion, if we follow the Morgan Stanley prediction, which is that 20% of real estate won't be needed anymore, then the question becomes, how do we fill that? And how do we flip that into residential housing? I said this to someone the other day, and they said, the track record of converting commercial real estate to residential is wretched. Great, then let's get ahead of it. Let's set up regulations. Let's not bail out firms that are struggling. Let's the government buy them, acquire them, turn them into social housing for young people, loft living. One local council said to me right at the start of this, they said, we had no capability, one London council, we had no capability of people working remotely. None of our people had laptops. Within a month, everyone had laptops, we were working remotely. Within 2 months, they decided that they were either going to sell one of their buildings or convert it into residential property for the people who live in their borough. Fantastic. We need more of this. I know it's not going to be easy, but I genuinely believe we'll look back and we'll say, oh, wow, that was such an important moment of making London into a vibrant, exciting and habitable place again. I'm very optimistic on it. optimists always find themselves running aground and finding that sadly life isn't that good. I'm uncowed. I'm incredibly optimistic that this is the making of the next generation of London.
Look, I'm almost tempted to end on that, that very positive note. But let me just go a little bit further into that, Jeremy. So this essentially says, okay, stop being an office park and start being somewhere where people want to live because they're able to and because they enjoy it. What's your perspective on that from a big company point of view and from the customers that you work with? What do people need to do, and what message should we give to the political leaders? We haven't really seen a lot about this in the recent election discussions. What do they need to do to London to make it really the sort of place Bruce is talking about?
Yeah, I agree with Bruce's optimism, and when things appear to be nuts, like the price of property in London, like the fact that people are congested in cramped trains, for 1 or 2 hours a day, and they're empty for the rest of the day. There has to be a correction, and I think this is the opportunity for that correction. And we will see a lot of innovation in terms of how we use the current resources that we have. What's my message to politicians and others is that we need to invest in the infrastructure to make this work. When we moved to home working, many people moved seamlessly, but not everybody. And including in central London, there are still plenty of not spots in terms of broadband connectivity. A friend of mine called me from central Hammersmith early on and said, "Can you help me? I can't get broadband." There are many examples of people in the city with poor connection, either to their home or inside their home. So we need to make sure that we do not delay the rollout of fibre to the premise, which I think is a fundamental infrastructure to enable this sort of flexible working to take place. And also, if we see empty offices, I agree, we've got to find ways of converting offices into proper homes and enabling people to stay in the city. I was a student in London. I came here as a student and I stayed for many years. Loved the city, seen it change, seen it adapt over the years. And I feel optimistic that this is an opportunity for us to regenerate and regrow.
Excellent. So we can do it. We should do it. Thank you both very much. Can I just ask you maybe one tip to people, individuals? What would be your one tip for any individual to the post-pandemic, the future? What would you say to do? Get some tech skills, think about starting a business, manage your work-life balance, stop commuting. What would you say, Bruce? One tip for people.
Yeah, I think to some extent we've all reflected on what an act of mass delusion it was that we needed to get on the daily commute, to do this long trudge, and to some extent we've gone into something similarly hypnotic. We're doing all these video calls, and so if any of us reflect right now when we feel like we are ignited by our jobs and we try to steer towards that. As I said before, the hybrid working debate is one of inclusion, and articulate your case to your work. Explain to your work that you want to carry on working flexibly in some capacity. I think trust has increased in this era. We've demonstrated that people can work when they're not sitting next to each other, and I would strongly urge people to try and ensure that they don't compromise and go and work for organisations that are going to enable them to work in that way.
So take control of things. Jeremy, would you echo that,
Yeah.
or would you have a different perspective?
I would add, I would say there's a great question that a lot of us have asked ourselves as we've been through the last year or so. What is the point? What is the point of the office?
Yeah.
What's the point of this Zoom meeting? Is there a better way of doing this? And can we take the opportunity to do it differently? And I think the final point to the leaders of our organizations is listen to your staff, because what they say what should steer how you rebuild your organization. And I think those leaders that listen to their staff and continue to listen to their staff will probably prevail in the future.
Thanks very much. And let me conclude then by thanking you both, Bruce Daisley and Jeremy Thompson. Really interesting discussion. It's been great chatting with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.